We'll wrap up the day. So we'll start with Roger's thoughts.
Okay. Yeah. No, thank you so much, and maybe I'll put this right in. There we go. Yeah, I'll sit down and speak. We're at a sort of a smaller crowd, so this is the hardy survivors of the day, and I want to thank you all for staying around. And I think it was worthwhile, and I actually want to make a comment on the structure as well, because we went through some waves of ideas and waves of approaches. I mean, when going into this conference, I think, I was thinking, okay, well, how is this going to play out? And, we start off with the discussion of, borders in a historic perspective and looking at, three specific areas, and coincidentally, three tri-state areas. And I thought that was an interesting way, maybe by coincidence, but to make some initial comparisons, because, if we're just thinking of one cross-border, pretty easy, we look on state-on-state issues, but once we throw in a third partner, and then we look at a region that has influences from the outside, and whether we're looking at the triple frontera, where we also have external actors, we have non-state actors playing a role. Fergana Valley, the same thing, also the influence of other forces. I don't even have to get into the development of training centers by the Russian military and the U.S. military presence there, NATO presence, and other presences in the region, where we really look at areas that have multiple actors. And even the Trans-Baikal region, clearly we're looking at significant actors of Russia and China, and a very, I would say, much understudied country with respect to border issues, Mongolia. Wedged between two neighbors, somehow managing to survive and work and really move in its own direction. Sometimes I think to the dismay of some of these neighbors. And so, we look at the factors that were cultural, identity issues, language issues, shifting power dynamics, and all of these. I think it was worth starting from that direction. If you want to say, looking at the historic, the concrete, the actual, at sort of the broader regional level, we get down to some issues of the state and state responses, and I like the way that was phrased. Again, looking at specific border zones. We're looking at the Fatah. It's been studied quite a bit, but we're learning more and more, and I sort of wish the information that you are presenting now, when Jeff presented his information, that this was the sort of things that we were studying, say, 5-8 years ago, would have been much easier, I think. We're sort of coming to some realities here. The same, I would say, in the Caucasus, a very sensitive and delicate area. First time I traveled into the Caucasus was in 1986, going into Georgia, and I thought it was a distinct country, not part of the Soviet Union. And what we see, of course, looking at the current examples that we heard from the second and third presenters, is states that are really struggling with not even just their own identity. That's solid. We have that. But controlling what they feel they own, and controlling what at least is if not deemed a birthright, but which through the founding mythologies that states build, what's their territory? Whether it's Georgia, looking at its broader expanse, Greater Armenia, the concept not just of the Armenian territory we have, but even across, and of course the highlights of Mount Ararat are important, but even the question of Karabakh. And I know she's not here, when Shannon O'Leary was bringing these up, I recall years back I used to teach seminars with Armenian and Azerbaijani officers. We would, in fact, I had Georgians and Russians in there as well. It was a South Caucasus seminar, security seminar, and literally depending on which map I put up, a certain constituency would be upset. Whether a city was named a certain name or another name, it would come up. And so, it's clear that we're looking at these challenges in all of our cases. We're looking at really power. And for all of these states that were mentioned in the second panel, it's really about who controls what. Which states and which communities define power relations and dynamics. And it's sort of something I was able to pull out from all three, is not only how do they control it, but also how do they communicate it? How is it expressed in each country and in each sub-region? And of course, again, We're looking at areas that have been very difficult to solve for years, not just recent dramas, but we're looking at things that have had actually extended stays. Since Martha's here, I won't really have to say much about your conversation, except to note that you packed an amazing amount of information in a very short amount of time. So I applaud you on that. You showed really how these issues are played out also at the high politics level, and reminding us as well that these decisions between and among states, are on personalities. And I don't think you could emphasize enough the individuals we're bringing in. I would contend, in fact, the difficulties between some of these states could change, could even not disappear, but could perhaps even be addressed if certain personalities eventually met their actuary table expiration date and left. A polite way of saying some figures are going to have to go if we want to see real cross-border solutions. But you also added the very real and unfortunately ominous trends of population growth, migration. People talk about future problems in the region as the population expands. Well, here's the welcome news to everybody, or unwelcome news. It's here. The population's grown. And you already have a constituency that are the teenagers and the preteens that will be needing jobs in the next 3-5 years, if not less. Where are they coming from? And if they don't get them, as you noted, there aren't many options. And what options are available aren't the best, which really leads us to this third panel on what I would say are the specific results of, if not, I don't want to necessarily say mismanaged borders, because we're often dealing with some very effective states, and in our Westphalian mindset, states that are very successful, but phenomena that transcend these, that work with the borders, through the borders, and as we heard, sort of, if you believe it's real power and authority, it is. And we're looking at weapons trafficking, we're looking at documents and migrants, we're looking at human trafficking. Three very difficult phenomena, and actually done in three very different ways. And I like the approach of either the personality case study, looking at specific transactions taking place to get alternative documents, if you will, but also then a good empirical analysis and sort of cause and effect study of human trafficking, and looking at the Turkish case. But obviously Central Asians and people from the former Soviet Union going through and into Turkey. And in each of these, of course, we really run up against that problem of how well do we manage not just our borders, but what's within our borders. And in democracies, it makes it even harder. In a nice authoritarian 1984 state, yeah, we probably could, or a Minority Report approach, we can read into the minds of people and really manage affairs. But in our current world, and even in futuristic 2011, I guess some of us at one point thought 2011 was way in the future, but even in this current year, there's still so much left to chance, and so much that are these factors that really rely on human nature, human behavior, and authenticating documents, people, and relationships. And this gray area we see is quite large. I mean, the Victor Boot's case, fascinating. And then I noticed, at one of the end slides, of course, you had the Blackwater boys, and you know what? There's a whole world out there that we almost don't want to look at, because, of course, it makes the states themselves the protectors of the borders, defenders of these legitimate nation states, maybe have to look in the mirror and see how we ourselves deal with these factors. And so as we go through all of these, I mean, on the one hand, you can say, boy, we spent all Friday looking at some really depressing topics and some really threatening issues. On the other hand, I think what we've done is we've learned a lot about this phenomena of borders in different ways than sort of the usual dry demarcation of lines and creating set states. I mean, we in fact barely touched on that. We looked more at the so what questions, and what does this mean in a wide range of countries. Some of the maps shown at the end, which emphasize the global nature, and in fact even very map on the agenda, I think we represented it well. I mean, a bit of a strength in the sort of South Caucasus, Central Asian realm, but we were able to touch into other districts, and I was glad to see that. You know, and just to close, to say that as an attempt to look at you know, migrations, shadow economies, and security issues on the world's borders, I think we've done it justice in a 3-panel day, and look forward to future sessions. I'll, you know, I guess turn it over to the two of you for your comments, but then also I think we should hear, you know, what folks thought about the day, but also put this in the back of your mind, and I hope to hear from you in a few minutes. What were some things perhaps that were missing? What were some topics we could have brought up, or if we look at future iterations, that we could bring up? So something to think about for a few minutes as I turn it down the table.
Okay. Thank you. Maybe I'll try to push towards the things we didn't bring up in the context of the things we did. I thought it was a really rich day, and I thought that the 3 panels really asked many of the many similar questions in very different kinds of ways. You know, so it was we got to see the various kinds of border issues and this whole notion of trying to understand what transnational is. I think it was very useful to go beyond Central Asia and the Caucasus and introduce other parts of the world. I mean, I think that it created more of a context for understanding the lack of, so many of us that worked with Central Asia or the Caucasus spend all our time looking at the particularistic aspects of our own regions and don't spend enough time looking at the generalizations. And in that regard, I found the African presentation the most interesting, because it was a background that was, that's always one of my pet things, is to talk about the comparisons between Africa and a lot of the Central Asian states and a lot of the developmental stages they're at. And the lessons that you could get from Africa looking at Central Asia and problems that are going to come its way. So I think that the synergies created, I'm not talking about the Latin American one from the morning, you know, just because I know less about it, but for me that the African synergy was very useful, and I think if the project moves forward, it would be useful to bring in other parts of the world. I mean, not to become a global project, but to bring in synergies, and the Middle East would be a likely place to. I think that was something I thought was missing. To say things that, like ideas that I come away with, or things that I think about coming from it, from hearing these things, hearing the presentations, I wonder if, not so much we here today, but when we talk about these border-related and transboundary questions, if we're asking, are we solving the right problems? One of the things that I took away was everybody in their paper in one form or another was talking about problems that were inadvertently created by somebody trying to solve a different problem. And I'm not being sarcastic, that these are problems that, you know, that even if you go back to the Boreats, the insurgency in Transbaikalia, somebody was trying to solve a different developmental problem. They were.
Yeah,
they really were. I mean, I was doing something in the last couple of days, responding to somebody asking questions about, you know, displacement of Kazakh nomads, which is what I wrote my dissertation on. And I mean, that was my dissertation theme, the settlement of the Kazakh nomads, taking a historical period from 1867 through 1938. But for a lot of that time, people were trying to solve another person's economic problems. I mean, you were trying to solve land problems in Russia and Ukraine. You know, the whole period, the history of, you can write, nobody's written, and nobody yet is showing any signs of doing it, because everybody's written history in post-Soviet space from a state building perspective. But you know, nobody's written the history of the settlers that came there or forced there as not ideological. You know, the poor Ukrainian peasant who was always trying to solve his life solution and wound up in Kazakhstan. You know, and 3 generations in, then got displaced again. Yeah, you know, it's like there are so many alternative histories that could be told depending upon the point of view of whose problem you're trying to solve. And lots of these problems lots of the issues we talked about today were the product of failed development solutions, or my example about the hydroelectric power. You know, there's even a lot of these problems that we talk about, and border is another issue I think that needs to come in, trans-border management issues, I think, is another big theme that we talk about borders. But even still, people's solutions may be incoherent. They may think they're coherent, and if you go back over time and look at different developmental models that are applied even by Western development institutions, with time, what seems coherent at the time becomes incoherent over time, and we got a real flavor of that today. But that's another common theme. It's like somebody's developmental model doesn't work the way it's supposed to. I think you could use the same perspective with a lot of the border management issues. It's like I've spent a lot of time, not as much as you, but we both spent time, but you a lot more, with people charged with trying to manage some of these borders from different countries. And in most cases, people's motivations are really good, but you never guess it from seeing some of the mess that results, So there's a lot of well-intentioned efforts, or people in some of the states that I know trying to balance conflicting interests, economic interests with security interests, or even just trying to figure out how they move forward with their security, a 50-year plan for their security development, or a 30-year plan. And so I think that there's this whole host of new problems being created by, that we've touched on a lot. The same thing with the women, the trafficking in women comes into it's a problem created by trying to solve some other problem and doing a bad job at it. This dislocation of women, the migration, the dislocation is one of the things that would follow on your work on the women, is the dislocation that I've done some things on, and I have friends that are doing more on, is the dislocations of families caused by migration. Women being left as head of families because of migration, and what happens when the women get sick or the women die. There's a whole new phenomenon of orphans now in Central Asia that's the product of migration. There are whole new patterns of women's dependency, that are caused by migration. So there are a whole host of social problems that are derivative for it. And then the last thing I want to say, because I know we'll come back to talk about what should come later, is I come away with a question, and this is more me than I come away more of it listening to the presentations today, but wondering if we are in flux. That it seems to me when, and again, just because I'm so struck by the degree of chaos in the Middle East, many of the problems we talked about today, even the way we're understanding the historic problems, are caused by the changes of the post-1989 and beyond. That 1989 and beyond created a whole host of new ways of studying social science, not just what we studied, how we studied, the kind of questions we asked. Then we were going to become globalized. That was the vocabulary, and that's in a sense how we've talked about the Middle East, that this is a global revolution, and it's people twittering, and it's one state building on the other. But it may well be that we're moving not to transnational, but the absence of national. We may be moving into an area where there's large-scale chaos in part of the world. Well, chaos. State collapse in a place where we're not going to ignore it. I don't know enough about Africa to know which states were just in bad trouble and which states were closer to collapse. But in the Middle East, I think a lot of these states are really close to collapse. And we're really looking at what I think is going to be state failure. And so so are we asking these questions at a time when there's going to be a whole host of new agendas for social science research, and that the whole question of it will be looking at border and migration and shadow economies, but looking at it in a place not where we're talking about the Westphalian or a new globalized post-Westphalian system, but a real crisis in the Westphalian system that probably mirrors a lot of the crisis at the end of World War I rather than the crisis in World War II, where we had answers. And crisis at the end of World War I, there were a lot of makeshift decisions to these. And those are the decisions haunting us in the Middle East, I think. But for me, the question is, I honestly believe that we're at the point of major flux in how we think of the world and the actions of the big powers in it. Because the last point I'll make is that we talked a lot, we never talked about the great powers explicitly, and we didn't talk about China enough at all, because they're an actor in all these issues, and they're an actor that doesn't like to take responsibility and then rolls back. But yet, these are all activities that great powers have failed to successfully either That's what I'm saying. That's exactly what I was looking for. that it's exactly that their efforts at intervention have oftentimes made it worse, or in the case of the Caucasus and North Caucasus, they've been very unsuccessful efforts at manipulation. I think in Central Asia they've been reasonably successful. They've had they don't have the same ambitious goals, and they don't put the same resources in, but it's certainly not a success. You know, it's just not a glorious failure.
All
right, shall I grab that a bit?
Sure, sorry.
So I want to thank everybody for coming and participating. I think this is, from my perspective, this is the second of our kind of, we've had security update type things before these last 2 years, but Tom and I and some other people got our heads together, and Ray, last year, the year before, and said, let's just do something that's important and sustain year after year. And so this is our second year of doing this. And I have to say that this year is more than twice as successful as last year, it seems to me.
Right, given that we get to invent the measure by which we can multiply it.
We had twice as many talks. We had twice as many
yeah.
attendants. We had better food.
Yes.
We had
Excellent. It was really excellent.
We had really better discussion by a long shot. I think we achieved more.
Yeah.
And so the sky's the limit next year, right? As a humanist again, I find these discussions really, really interesting, and I'm always looking for ways conceptually to cross that border between social sciences and humanities. I mean, I read specific artifacts, texts, as I was saying earlier. I don't need to go into what I do, but it's quite different from what the rest of you do. And we've been struggling very much with the relevance of what we do. And it seems to me you all are helping me make myself relevant again, so thank you for that. Thinking about, I mean, the word that comes to mind, one of the things I teach is kind of the post-world. And so post-colonialism, post-modernism, post-Soviet, or post-socialism, if you will, post-communism, from a cultural point of view. And, you know, I started thinking, you know, learning about postmodernism as, oh, you know what, we really critically look at how we write history. What is historiography? What's a fact? Then, you know, is postmodernism just a parody of everything that's out there, particularly anything that has to do with enlightenment, science, scientific values, rationalism, modernity and modernism, both of which are somewhat different things. And then I started studying people like this total Russian gadfly, I want to say, Alexander Dugin, who's one of the ultra-rightists on the Russian scene right now. And the guy had the chutzpah to start talking about postmodernism, but he started defining a Eurasian postmodernism, which was literally back to Muscovy, back to a new Middle Ages. And I think he's not tongue-in-cheek about that. And so what I'm seeing, and I find this corroborated today to some degree, that there's a return of the repressed. There's a return to a lot of things that we thought human nature was getting beyond. We've discovered human nature really isn't progressively perfectible in quite the same ways that we hoped it was. I think the 20th century maybe taught us that, slapped us upside the head once again. I mean, we had, of course, the 17th century particularly, and then we had some relatively happier times, 18th, 19th, not so many human earthquakes then. 20th century just hit the heck out of us. You know, it's sort of a shock to see that we aren't that egalitarian, just, good, free world. maybe, that we hoped we were. And all these this talk about borders, I think maybe brings that home in some sort of valuative 3D way. And it locates us in those spaces. On the other hand, you know, it was very heartening to me, again, going back to a good kind of post-colonial, post-modernist way, to see that localities have a lot to say about what goes on. You know, it's not just the state. You know, it's not just this quote-unquote enlightened, but in fact very self-interested bunch of typically guys and sometimes gals, right?
Increasingly gals, actually.
Well, I don't know. We're seeing Atumbayeva, but
no,
I kept asking
foreign ministers in Europe. There are a whole host
no,
of
okay,
them.
Europe. But who else is, you know, is there in the parts of the world we're talking about? Not USA, not Europe. And before Nadia gave her talk, I was going, where are the women? Where are the women? You know, and we had one picture. Okay, whom we want to get to KU at some point, by the way. Anyway, you know, those are just some thoughts.
She's free after the end.
I think for next year.
Yeah, for next year, we bring
This
Rosa.
year it was the bridge too far. Next
Yeah,
year.
we'll talk about the Rosa Revolution next year. Anyway, just
You'll happily
Rosa the Tulip or something.
Rosa.
Anyway, right. In any case, I'm really, really excited about this new agenda for social sciences and, you know, crisis. You know, crisis brings new solutions and messes up old ones, and the new solutions draw bad lines again. But I like the idea that local peoples, as retrograde as they may be, are having some sort of a say in things. Okay, now, my job really is not to talk on and on, but to think about what we do next with these 9 very good papers that already have some coherence among them, it seems to me. I'm not the person to edit a volume, so, you know, if we're going to talk, let me just lay out some ideas. There could easily be 3 very interesting forums that individual authors would work together. You know, the panel could work together and come up with a unit that you then put out there and submit to a journal. That's a very good idea. Slavic Review is very interested in those things. Our journals in my world area are very welcoming of clusters of articles. Another possibility that I'm going to just draw on Tom here for a minute. Tom just mentioned that he's got a volume on borders that he's kind of shopping out and has in the works. We could think about who's interested, maybe in submitting, or which ones work, and you would come back to them. The other possibility is we find somebody who wants to own this volume, and we create a volume and we publish it separately as a conference volume on this topic, which certainly we have by no means exhausted at all, and there's some pretty big gaps. We could take it as it is, we could expand it and find other people to write, and either somebody like FIMSO could publish it, or CREASE could publish it.
CGIS.
Or CGIS could publish
it.
it. Okay, and the other thing would be to do that ish, you know, piece, and then put these papers also on the website. Now I know that some of you who are going for tenure know that conference volumes don't get as many brownie points as a peer-reviewed piece does. So I think what I'll do is just stop there and get some thoughts from you. Yeah.
I don't know if you're aware, my anthropology colleagues organized an international conference on migration just a few months ago, or not that many months ago.
Last year it was.
And we will publish a book by Cambridge University Press on migration. I, as an anthropologist who do several things, and I'm surprised, I mean, there are now anthropologists. That conference on migration was primarily on human migration, where we came from, the genetic component in migrating human beings, and then case studies from all over the world on migration. I don't know if you know, 20% of migration today is illegal migration.
It's elite.
And my particular paper was on the Chinese migration into Peru, which is the entry point for Chinese into the Americas. So I just wanted to tell you, there are other people that have done migration. There is going to be a volume coming out, and I urge you to have a little bit more cooperation, even at KU, because some anthropologists, like my colleagues in Lippincott, are very interested in the topic and have done some.
Felix, thank you for that. In terms of cooperation, we put the word out there quite a long time ago, and we would have been glad to have more papers and so forth. So read your emails. Other thoughts?
Just a logistical kind of thought. I didn't see a lot of students here, and of course Friday's not a good day for that probably. But you know, whatever it takes, and then every college campus is different, you know, and free food always helps, of course, and a rock band wouldn't hurt. You know, continuous video, something. But I'm just saying, because I know that's a real dynamic. A couple of comments we had from graduate students were always, you know, a little more excitable and get you thinking and make you lay out your information. You know, so I'll dress up in a clown suit or something to stand outside, whatever it takes. You know.
I'm going to throw this out to the so was this about right in terms of its breadth? Was this the subject matter and then the attended, you know, briefings about right? Should this sort of venue, if it, you know, as it goes forward next year, be more focused? You know, perhaps have it picked one, you know, hydro transnational border issues or something. I mean, are you that focused, or what's the right, you know, breadth of this? And actually, let's start there, right?
I just came from 3 weeks at Michigan State, which is the second year I've been there doing a teaching stint. And one of the things that they have begun to do, partly because of the difficulty of raising money, is engaging actually people from the natural sciences and the different professional schools, but I mean like people doing things that have to have real skills like water management, you know. And some, I mean, I gave a talk yesterday and I had people from the agriculture department and people, you know, from a whole host of technical areas that had worked in Central Asia. And you have the same kind of capacity here to convene different, you know, you have different schools here and different specialties. If you have the ability to do something like water or hydro power or oil and gas extraction, and, you know, really bring together people that have all the different sides of the expertise on the question. Which would be, I think it's great to bring in grad students, but it's also great, and the anthropologists, you know, but I would go even further and bring in people that we as social scientists or humanists don't normally think of having something to contribute to the debate. Now, how you convince people who are busy that they want to come and give you their time is another story. I think it requires more than the clown suit and the free lunch, but you know, there is really this. There are skill sets that none of us in the room have that are really useful to bring into some of these questions, especially when you military people do it all the time. I mean, you assume that there are technical problems with border management that you have to think about, and it's not just, you know, thinking about how states want to manage it. But we don't do it so much in the social sciences with other problems that really have a strong technical underpinning.
Well, and I was going to say in this one, as I looked at it, and as we sort of progressed through the day and the sort of conversations, we were focusing ourselves more in the social science world, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, first, let's take a step back and say, with limited time, if we try to do everything, we're going to do nothing. If we sort of devote 5 minutes for every aspect, it's going to be difficult. But, we looked at issues of state sovereignty. We looked at issues of, and in fact, if anything that limits to state sovereignty, we looked at power and who exercises power, what defines power, even the exercise of power on borders. I mean, Shannon O'Leary's discussion of Russia using border management, power, conflict, etc. But then also the interesting thing that I saw, and maybe this is something for a future effort, I almost want to call these survival techniques by society, and this gets to some of our comments from from West Africa, from people who are trafficked, and even survival techniques of people who sell arms to states, which is, if we think in terms of states and state power as the exclusive control of the means of violence, well, here we have survival techniques to manage this phenomenon. And so, we kind of moved in an interesting progression, staying within our social science framework. Now, to go beyond that, you're right, we could either take one of these themes or, in some instances, do the practical, or take other communities.
You could do both.
Exactly.
In a day and a half, you could do both a general and then a very specific.
Yeah. I mean, and we've both been on panels where, we'll take one small example, like energy security. And you have a couple of social scientists who will talk about it. And, we know the language, we know the words, and we know the impact on states. And then you bring in a couple people from the energy sector, oil company executives who deal with security issues. And that's a completely different discourse. And yet they're complementary. We're talking about security, we're talking about micro-level practical measures, and then we're also talking about real measures. I mean, I was at an event, pipeline security was a good issue debated. And you had a social scientist looking at state-on-state questions of pipeline security, and then they had a guy from BP going into, well, how exactly do you protect a physical thing called a pipeline? That's two different languages, but they're complementary. And so this gets to the issues you're raising. When we look at future questions, could we marry things like that in future panels?
Well, and then I guess the second part of that question, I mean, okay. But the broad question is do you pick a topic like, border insecurity is really big, and then, call for papers, call for proposals, and find it the most doable, the most interesting, or do you up front say, let's look at energy security, or one of the, and then bring in the breadth of speakers for everything from the sociological, historical to the technical. I mean, it's kind of, it seems like it goes one, it's a branch goes one or the other. My question is, if you had to vote, one or the other, which what
But even if you took the oil security, you could bring in the anthropologists. I mean,
No.
one of the issues. No, I'm saying it's like it's so.
To.
Yeah. No, I know, but it's like it's so many. It's rights of indigenous peoples. It's not. It's like that's what I meant by bringing in the anthropologists. There are a whole host of questions on energy when you talk about developing some of Russian energy regions that normally we don't hear in Washington at all. But if you go to Moscow, you hear those first and foremost.
Yeah.
And it's a complex, as you pointed out, but it's a complex, multidisciplinary agenda, and you could do both if you had enough time. Putting the question that you're focusing on in a broader perspective of security for the beginning, and then actually trying to divvy it up into the component pieces, and then ask at the very end. You'd be in a better position to ask, well, does the general positions that were elucidated at the beginning, do they actually respond to these kinds of, do they reflect the multiplicity of actors, forces, and interests that are trying to affect this policy?
That's good. And for those here, I mean, when we started off this, I think the first year, it really was based out of the, sort of the Crease region, so, and then, but this one was a deliberate first effort in, involving more departments at the University of Kansas, and then, so that answers, what Felix is saying. I think next year, learning lessons from this year on, getting the topic out and everything. I mean, I think that's definitely a path this will continue with, right? The, more reach across campus for sure into the departments.
To schools.
The schools, yeah. So
Even
that's,
sorry.
that's just a, I think if there's a question on scope, you know, and depth, then the other question is on, is it just focused on our region or global? And I probably it's this more global.
But even if you take increases the focus, you know, even if you took energy security, the African lessons, it's like Nigeria is a lesson. All the different African examples are brought in all the time in Central Asia by the oil companies. No oil company executive is going to talk about risk in Central Asia without talking about Africa. It's absolutely first and foremost in their minds when they talk about it. Some of them talk about Russia, others talk about Africa, and it depends on the project. But you hear so much about it. And the people that come to work in Central Asia are oftentimes people who have worked in Africa. And in the case of Chevron, they've been project managers from their African operations. I mean, it's not just Americans working in Africa. It's Africans coming in to Chevron in California and then coming into Kazakhstan. The public relations person on that project from San Ramon was a Nigerian for several years at least. I mean, you know, some of the people in Washington have been from Africa doing the public relations stuff. So it's really the interchangeability from the point of view of the actors in the field is real. You know, they're looking at it globally, no matter what we're looking at it as.
That's very true. I mean, yeah, you don't get one person in one area that doesn't say, well, let me tell you how it was over here. Yeah.
Which sometimes there's a bit of resistance in our area to do just that.
Exactly.
I mean, if you go to Central Asia and you discuss the African examples, you're going to get a reaction that's often not positive.
Right, but the people who are doing investment in there, and now Latin America has become truly important. Central Asians have several of them, Uzbeks and Kazakhs, are involved with Brazil. And the U.S. ambassadors from those countries are ambassadors to Brazil. I mean, Latin America really fits now in many ways. With
I think
like,
the examples are global, and I think they ought to be. I think, no, it's the drawback of people who become so regionally focused. They don't want to look at the examples, and they, you know, for whatever sort of mythical reason they'll make up of why they don't apply. But there are so many things that are transnational.
And the regions themselves, the question about whether Central Asia will still be there, you know, it's like Central Asians that have direct ties with Brazil are behaving differently than Central Asians who have had all their ties through Moscow, you know, it's like, that's a big change in Central Asia, those states that have relations with countries as diverse as have ambassadors to Brazil, and Brazilian presidents come to visit them. You know, they're different than the states like Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan that have trouble finding the money to come to New York.
Other thoughts, comments?
Yeah.
Sean?
Actually, I was thinking if I mean, future project would include issues which is kind of interesting. For instance, like illegal trafficking of nuclear. How do you call this? It's not a waste, but actually nuclear material. Several, for instance, at least I know that several reports, and one of them was in Foreign Policy Journal, published through Georgia, and it could be some other places in Central Asia, something so which would be I don't know, and this is also related to the cross-border and illegal smuggling of this. And I don't know if there is some experts, maybe in Central Asia or some other, maybe also could fit for.
Security issue.
Oh yeah, no, I think that's.
I mean, the basic idea of these conferences is there has to be some security component. So that would be
Definitely would be.
an interesting topic.
There's,
And it has to deal with the world's regions.
yeah, Casanova, that's her name. She's in DC. Yeah, she does, but she's with, I think it's like Duke University, but it does sort of the transporter, nuclear issues, or actually she also does chemical and biological issues cross-border.
I know also one postdoc, he's from Georgia, he's now George Washington University, Georgia, his PhD.
So silence must mean consent, and everything we say is correct.
Yeah.
There we go. No. That's right. That's right. But I guess No, I was saying just, yeah, to your, I guess, going back to your original thing, your thoughts on this, I suppose, as we look at, the future of this project, where you want it to go, probably not even bad to contact our writers and see what options they have and interests and.
Right, I mean,
Particularly those
I know at a minimum what we'll be able to do is once FIMSO determines the book project, which is on border security somehow. Once we determine the nature of that, at a minimum, we reach back out or ensure the people that were here today are on that call for book chapter proposals. So they may find that their writing for the day just is neatly turned into that. But it'll just be a proposal because we don't know what the book is. There's a couple directions the book might go. So a great presentation here might not fit the way the book's going to end up being, if there is a book. So, but at least they'll be invited for the call proposal. So that's sort of a, to use the vernacular, deliverable.
Yeah.
Something they, and then certainly, I mean, we got websites to hang stuff on, but as you say, that's not necessarily what people who've done research might want their work. Other than that, right as I sit here today, I don't know what else I can do, but at least they'll be.
Yeah, just from my own limited experience with this, if you want to go, the book route, I think you are best off just getting someone, putting someone in charge of that,
Exactly.
and going after people immediately. If you let this slide, if you give people another 8 weeks before you get in touch with them, forget it.
Right.
What you want
It has
is
to
somebody
happen Monday.
who sends out an email on Monday saying,
Exactly.
thank you for your blah, 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 blah. These are the next
Yes.
steps. In the next 2 weeks, give me this. And then, somebody who does this on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, so that you pay very close attention to people.
Right.
It involves a lot of frustration. It involves a lot of disappointment. Many people will not reply. Some will reply. Some won't. You are going to have all kinds of experiences.
Yep.
So you need somebody
I've edited
in charge of these, and somebody who will just literally hold on to people's clothes to say, I need this chapter by so day. I need this number of words. You must get it to me. And then somebody is also committed to actually proofreading those chapters and giving authors comments before they are sent out, to review. So it's a lot of investment of time and discipline. But don't let people go away for 3 weeks. And then when you send them an email, they say, what name is this? Who is this? Oh, those guys.
But if this is your topic, if there's someone here in this room who thinks it would be great to edit a volume like this, and you have a vision, it's a lot of vision. It's extremely rewarding. I've edited quite a number of volumes at this point and done
also
forums and
painful.
so forth.
Gee.
If it's your theme, come talk to us.
I've done 2. I've almost shot people.
I was just going to say, I come from your tradition, and they've almost shot me. I don't know.
You really have to ride.
Yeah, you have to be on people's cases.
You ride them like a horse.
Every day. It involves a lot of time and
Well, maybe over dinner we can all discuss.
yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Okay, well then I think this is a good time to stop. Thank you so much for your participation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.